By now, survival has already stripped away most of what made life recognizable. Comfort is gone. Stability is gone. The idea that tomorrow will resemble today has disappeared completely. Yet somehow, despite the hunger, the cold, the endless movement, and the constant fear of being discovered, you are still alive. Unfortunately, being alive as a medieval outlaw comes with one final problem. Your body is beginning to fail. At first, it happens gradually. A small stumble on uneven ground, a twisted ankle while crossing a muddy path, a cut from a broken branch that seems harmless enough to ignore. In ordinary life, these would barely matter. You would clean the wound, rest for a few days, perhaps complain dramatically to anyone willing to listen. But that life no longer exists. Out here, every injury carries consequences far larger than the wound itself. The cut becomes infected because there is no proper treatment. The swelling increases. Walking becomes painful. Pain slows you down, and slowing down is dangerous. Every step now requires effort. Every mile feels longer. Every decision becomes harder because exhaustion has already consumed most of your energy. The forest notices none of this. The weather certainly doesn't care. Rain arrives without concern for your condition. Cold nights continue as if your suffering is merely background scenery. You push forward because stopping is worse. Yet the body has limits, and medieval life specializes in discovering them. Days pass. Food remains inconsistent. Sleep remains poor. The injury refuses to heal properly. You begin to understand a reality that every outlaw eventually faces. Survival is no longer a matter of avoiding capture. It is a matter of outlasting yourself. Hunger sharpens into weakness. Weakness becomes fatigue. Fatigue clouds judgment. Simple choices suddenly become complicated. Which direction should you travel? Is that village worth approaching? Can you risk crossing that road? Questions that once required seconds now demand careful thought because your mind is operating on too little food and even less rest. Then comes sickness. Maybe it's an infection. Maybe it's contaminated water. Maybe it's simply the result of living outdoors for weeks while your body slowly runs out of resources. The exact cause hardly matters. What matters is that now you're not only tired, you're ill. Fever arrives like an unwelcome companion. Your muscles ache. Your head feels heavy. The world becomes slower, blurrier. Every task becomes difficult. Gathering food becomes difficult. Finding shelter becomes difficult. Remaining alert becomes difficult. And being alert is the only thing that has kept you alive so far. You try to continue. Of course you do. Survival has become habit. But the forest reveals another truth. Nature doesn't need dramatic predators to defeat you. Sometimes all it requires is a small illness at exactly the wrong moment. You rest longer than usual one afternoon, then longer the next day. The energy required to stand feels unreasonable. Movement becomes something you postpone. And every hour spent recovering is an hour spent becoming easier to find. Eventually, desperation pushes you back toward civilization. The forest no longer feels sustainable. You need food, real food, perhaps shelter, perhaps help. Maybe someone will remember who you were before the outlaw declaration. Maybe someone will show mercy. Hope, after all, has a remarkable ability to survive even when logic has given up entirely. So you approach a village, carefully, quietly. You stay near the edge at first, watching smoke rise from chimneys, listening to distant voices, observing ordinary life continue without you. It feels strange, not because the village has changed, but because you have. A few weeks ago, you belonged to places like this. You understood the routines, the expectations, the rules. Now you stand outside looking in like a ghost observing the living. For a moment, you almost convince yourself everything might work out. Then someone notices you. Perhaps it's a farmer returning from a field. Perhaps it's a child who points in your direction. Perhaps it's simply bad luck, something that has become increasingly familiar. Recognition spreads quickly, faster than you hoped. Faces appear, doors open, conversations stop. The atmosphere shifts. Nobody needs to announce what's happening. They already know. You're the outlaw, the person society removed, the individual whose presence creates problems. Fear appears first, then suspicion, then something worse, certainty. They know what you are, or at least they believe they do. And belief is often more powerful than truth. You back away before the situation can escalate. Perhaps they follow. Perhaps they simply watch. Either way, the message is clear. You are not welcome here. You leave carrying the same hunger, the same exhaustion, and now a little less hope than before. Days become weeks. Weeks become a blur of movement and survival. Seasons shift. The landscape changes. Yet your circumstances remain trapped in a cycle with no obvious ending. Every morning begins with uncertainty. Every night ends with discomfort. Every success is temporary. Find food today. Worry about tomorrow. Avoid danger now. Encounter new danger later. There is no progress, only continuation. And eventually, the hardest part arrives. Not hunger, not cold, not fear, loneliness. Human beings are built for connection, conversation, community, shared experience. Remove those things long enough and something begins to change inside you. The silence grows heavier. Thoughts become louder. Memories become sharper. You remember ordinary moments that once seemed insignificant. A meal shared with friends, a familiar voice, a warm room during winter. Things you never appreciated because you assumed they would always exist. Now they feel impossibly distant, almost unreal. You begin speaking less, even to yourself. There is nobody listening, nobody answering. The world becomes smaller. Survival leaves little room for anything else. And that's perhaps the cruelest part of outlaw life. It doesn't kill you immediately. It slowly removes everything that makes life worth protecting. Your home disappears. Your relationships disappear. Your security disappears. Your future disappears. What remains is existence reduced to its simplest form. Eat, move, hide, repeat. Yet even then, some outlaws survive for years. Not because conditions improve, but because humans possess a remarkable ability to adapt to almost anything. The impossible slowly becomes routine. The unbearable becomes familiar. You learn which paths are safest, which streams provide cleaner water, which villages are less dangerous, which risks are worth taking. Survival becomes skill rather than luck, but it never becomes easy. And that is the lesson hidden beneath the romantic stories. Medieval outlaws are often remembered as rebels, rogues, adventurous figures living freely beyond society's rules. The reality is far less glamorous. Freedom without protection is not freedom at all. It is exposure. Every day becomes a negotiation with hunger, weather, illness, exhaustion, and other people. Every sunrise presents new problems. Every sunset offers no guarantees. The forest never becomes home. The road never becomes comfortable. The danger never truly disappears. It simply changes shape. So if you somehow found yourself living as a medieval outlaw, the question wouldn't be whether you could fight, hide, or escape. The question would be whether you could endure. Whether you could wake up every morning carrying uncertainty like a permanent companion. whether you could continue moving when every part of your body wanted rest, whether you could survive not for days, but for months, perhaps years, while the world treated your existence as a mistake waiting to be corrected. Most people couldn't. Most people wouldn't. And honestly, that's understandable, because becoming a medieval outlaw wasn't an adventure. It was one of history's harshest punishments, a sentence that transformed every ordinary aspect of life into a challenge, and every challenge into a potential ending. The stories often focus on the excitement, the escapes, the legends. But the reality was colder, hungrier, lonelier, and far more exhausting. And as another long night settles over the forest, with the wind moving quietly through the trees and the darkness stretching endlessly ahead, you finally understand the truth that no medieval storyteller ever bothered to mention. The hardest part was never escaping society. The hardest part was surviving after society stopped caring whether you did. At some point, after weeks or perhaps months of surviving one disaster at a time, a dangerous thought begins to form. Maybe this life is sustainable. Maybe you've learned enough. Maybe you've adapted. You've found places to hide, routes to travel, and methods for finding just enough food to continue. The panic of the first few days has faded. The constant shock has been replaced by routine. And routine is deceptive because it feels like safety. It isn't. Medieval life has a habit of waiting patiently until you're comfortable before reminding you exactly how fragile everything is. The first sign comes during bad weather. Not ordinary rain, but the kind that arrives determined to prove a point. Clouds gather overhead, dark and heavy. The wind strengthens, trees bend and creak. Then the rain begins. Within minutes, every piece of clothing you own is soaked. Every path becomes mud. Every place you hope to shelter becomes wet, cold, and miserable. You quickly discover that hiding outdoors is significantly easier when the sky is cooperating. A storm changes everything. Fire becomes difficult. Dry ground disappears. Visibility drops. The temperature falls. What was already uncomfortable becomes dangerous. You search desperately for cover. A fallen tree, a shallow cave, the remains of an abandoned structure, anything that offers protection. But hundreds of other creatures have exactly the same idea. Birds, animals, insects, all seeking shelter from the same storm. Nature suddenly feels crowded. The rain continues for hours, then days. Your clothes never fully dry. Your boots remain damp. Every movement produces discomfort. Cold settles deep into your muscles. Sleep becomes nearly impossible. Even worse, prolonged exposure creates new problems. Skin cracks, feet blister, small wounds appear. Tiny injuries that wouldn't matter under normal circumstances now become serious concerns because infection is always waiting for an invitation. By the time the weather finally clears, you feel weaker than before. Not dramatically weaker, just enough to notice, just enough to understand that surviving outdoors means fighting battles no one sees. The storm leaves. The consequences stay. Then winter arrives. Up until now, conditions have been difficult. Winter transforms difficult into brutal. The air itself feels hostile. Every breath burns slightly. Mornings begin with frost covering the ground. Water freezes. Food becomes harder to find. Animals disappear. Plants stop growing. The forest loses whatever generosity it previously offered. Survival shifts from challenging to relentless. Each day requires more energy precisely when your body has less to spare. Fire becomes essential. Without it, cold quickly becomes deadly. But fire creates another problem, Smoke can be seen. Light can be seen. Warmth attracts attention. The very thing keeping you alive might also reveal your location. So every evening becomes a calculation. Freeze quietly or risk being discovered. Neither option feels particularly appealing. Hunger becomes even worse during winter. Small food shortages that were manageable before now become serious. The body burns more energy staying warm. Every missed meal matters more. Every unsuccessful search becomes more frustrating. You begin thinking about food constantly, not because you enjoy it, because your body refuses to think about anything else. A rabbit track becomes exciting. A handful of edible roots feels valuable. Success is measured differently now. Not comfort, not happiness, calories. Somewhere during these long winter weeks, you realize how much medieval society protected people simply by existing. Even poor villagers had roofs. They had storage. They had communities capable of sharing resources during difficult times. You have none of that. You are facing the same season alone. And winter is exceptionally good at exposing weaknesses. Eventually, another problem emerges. Loneliness evolves into something deeper. At first, being alone was frightening. Then it became normal. Now it begins changing the way you think. Days pass without conversation. Weeks pass without meaningful human interaction. You still see people occasionally from a distance, but distance is all that's allowed. Human voices become rare. Familiarity disappears. Your own thoughts grow louder simply because nothing else competes with them. Memories start appearing more often. Sometimes they're comforting. More often, they're painful. You remember family members, friends, ordinary moments that seemed insignificant when they happened. The smell of food cooking indoors, laughter during a meal, the simple certainty of knowing where you would sleep each night. These memories arrive without warning and leave behind a strange emptiness. You begin speaking aloud occasionally, not because anyone is listening, but because silence has become unbearable. The sound of your own voice feels reassuring. Proof that you still exist. Proof that you're still a person and not just another creature wandering through the wilderness. Yet even this changes over time. Conversations become shorter. Words become less necessary. Survival encourages simplicity. Find food. Find shelter. Avoid danger. Repeat. Eventually, the complexity of ordinary life starts fading from memory. Then comes perhaps the most dangerous challenge of all. Hope. Not the presence of hope. The absence of it. Hope is what carried you through the first days. The belief that things might improve. That some solution existed. That eventually this nightmare would end. But as months pass, reality begins to challenge those assumptions. You start asking difficult questions. What exactly are you waiting for? A pardon? Unlikely. Forgiveness? Uncertain. Rescue? Impossible. The future becomes difficult to imagine because every day looks remarkably similar to the one before it. Survival continues, but purpose begins disappearing. This is where many people fail. Not because they lack strength, not because they lack intelligence, because they run out of reasons. Human beings can endure extraordinary hardship when they believe it leads somewhere. Remove that belief, and even simple challenges become overwhelming. Yet somehow you continue. One more day, then another, not because you're confident, not because you're optimistic, simply because stopping feels wrong. Survival becomes instinct, a habit stronger than despair. And maybe that's the most remarkable thing about people. Their ability to continue even when continuation makes very little sense. Still, the world remains dangerous. Every road carries risk. Every stranger represents uncertainty. Every decision matters. One careless moment can undo months of effort. One mistake can end everything. You understand this now better than anyone, because outlaw life has taught you its most important lesson. Survival is not a victory. It is a process, temporary, fragile, constantly under threat. As another evening approaches and shadows stretch across the forest floor, you prepare once again for a night of discomfort, uncertainty, and interrupted sleep. The wind moves through the trees. Somewhere in the distance, an animal calls out. The world continues exactly as it always has, indifferent to your struggles. And sitting there beside a small hidden fire, watching the last light fade from the sky, you realize something strange. You're still here, tired, hungry, cold, alone, but still here. In a life designed to break people, that alone feels like an achievement. Tomorrow will bring new problems. It always does. But tomorrow has not arrived yet. For now, you have survived another day. And for a medieval outlaw, that is often the closest thing to success you will ever get. The longer you survive as a medieval outlaw, the more you begin to understand a truth that nobody tells you at the beginning. The greatest danger is not hunger. It is not cold. It is not even the people hunting you. The greatest danger is becoming careless. Survival creates confidence, and confidence has a remarkable ability to disguise itself as competence right before everything goes wrong. After months of avoiding patrols, finding shelter, and staying alive through circumstances that should have ended badly, you begin trusting your instincts more. Certain paths feel familiar. Certain hiding places feel reliable. Certain routines become comfortable, and comfort is exactly what gets people caught. One afternoon, you take a route you've used before. Nothing unusual about it. The forest feels quiet. The weather is clear. Your mind drifts slightly, focused more on finding food than avoiding danger. Then you notice something strange. Silence. Not the peaceful kind, the wrong kind. Birds have stopped making noise. The forest feels tense. Before you can fully understand why, voices reach your ears. Human voices. Close. Much closer than they should be. Instantly, every sense sharpens. Your heartbeat accelerates. The comfortable routine disappears. You crouch low and listen carefully. A patrol. Perhaps local guards. Perhaps men sent specifically to search for fugitives. Either way, the result is the same. They are exactly where you need them not to be. You remain still. Completely still. Minutes pass. They feel like hours. Twigs snap under heavy boots. Conversations drift through the trees. Someone laughs. Someone complains about the weather. The casual nature of it somehow makes everything worse. To them, this is work. To you, it is survival. One mistake, and the story ends here. Eventually the voices fade, the danger passes, but something changes inside you. The encounter reminds you how thin the line really is. Months of survival nearly undone because your attention slipped for a few moments. You continue moving afterward, but the confidence feels different now. Less certain, more cautious. And caution, strangely enough, keeps you alive. Yet avoiding capture is only part of the problem. Time itself has become an enemy. Seasons continue changing. Years perhaps begin passing. The world moves forward while you remain trapped in place. Villages grow. Children become adults. Local disputes begin and end. Harvests succeed or fail. Life continues for everyone else. For you, every day still revolves around the same basic needs: food, shelter, safety, survival. There is something deeply exhausting about watching history continue without you. you start realizing how much of ordinary life depends on belonging somewhere. People have responsibilities, relationships, goals, plans. Even their problems have structure. Your problems are simpler and somehow much worse. Every challenge begins and ends with staying alive. Nothing builds, nothing progresses. There is no future to prepare for because tomorrow remains uncertain. And yet, despite all of this, you occasionally encounter reminders of humanity. A farmer leaves food where he knows you might find it. A traveler pretends not to notice your presence. A shepherd looks directly at you, recognizes exactly who you are, and chooses silence instead of reporting you. These moments are rare, extremely rare, but they matter because they remind you that not everyone sees you as a